I've always lived my life watching other people's reactions. Adjusting myself to fit others was just my default setting. So even when it was hard, I didn't even realize it was hard. I kept pushing through like that, and eventually the problem in my mind started showing up in my body until I was finally diagnosed with panic disorder at a psychiatric clinic. I spent 3 years that genuinely felt like hell. Are you living a life that's actually for you? If you can't say yes to that question with full confidence, I hope you'll stay with me through this video. You'll walk away knowing the worst thing that happens when you don't live for yourself and what you need to do to avoid it. Let's get started. At first, you don't even realize you're struggling. That's how I lived too. I thought every day was just supposed to be like that. I told myself life is just hard by default. Waking up felt heavy, being around people was exhausting, and I kept getting irritated over the smallest things, but I brushed it off as just being busy lately. Looking back, a typical day went something like this. The moment I opened my eyes, I'd already start worrying about how the people I'd see that day would react to me. During the day, even when I had something to say, I'd read the room first. Before falling asleep, I'd replay some meaningless conversation from earlier that day over and over, wondering if I'd said something wrong. And through all of that, I never once asked myself if I was actually okay. It builds up day by day, quietly, in tiny increments. All those moments where I thought, I'll just get through today, I'll just let this one slide, they were quietly piling up without me noticing. Then at some point, the emotional strain started showing up physically. Suddenly, I'd feel like I couldn't breathe. My chest would tighten for no reason. My heart would start racing in completely ordinary situations, and I couldn't make it stop. Once this started repeating, it got to the point where I couldn't even function normally. I'd be eating and suddenly feel short of breath. Being in a crowded place would make me anxious for no clear reason. That's when it finally hit me. Something is wrong with me. That's when I finally understood. Looking back now, my body had actually been sending quite a few signals. Here's a rundown of what they were. First, it started taking longer and longer to fall asleep. Second, I never woke up feeling rested, no matter how much I slept. Third, I had trouble digesting food more often than not. Fourth, there were days I'd suddenly tear up over nothing, or the opposite, days I felt nothing at all. Fifth, I'd feel drained before I even met up with someone. At the time, I thought these were all separate, unrelated things. Looking back, they all came from the same root cause. If 2 or 3 of these sound familiar to you right now, please don't brush them off as nothing. Honestly, after that, I went through a lot of trial and error. I tried everything. I changed my environment. I stopped seeing people altogether for a while. I picked up new hobbies. I spent time alone, avoiding the outside world entirely. But strangely, nothing actually made me feel better at the core. I kept asking myself why, and eventually I realized something. The real issue was never external. It was in me. No matter how much I changed my environment, if the person reacting within that environment stayed the same pattern would just repeat itself. Even when I switched jobs, I ended up watching my new coworkers' reactions. Even when I saw fewer people, I was still erasing myself within those few remaining relationships. Looking back, I was always exhausted and on edge. When I really thought about why, it came down to this. I was paying far too much attention to other people. Even when I spoke, I checked people's reactions first. What will this person think if I say this? Will this upset them? Those thoughts always came before I could actually express my own opinion. I was constantly tense, constantly rigid. There were plenty of days I showed up to meet friends already exhausted before I even got there. Looking back on it now, it would have been strange if none of that had caught up with me eventually. Whether it's the body or the mind, staying in a constant state of tension will always eventually send out a signal. I didn't understand that back then, but I see it so clearly now. But is this really just my story? I recently ran a survey. One of the questions was this: I've chosen something simply because other people said it was good. 7 out of 10 people said yes to that, roughly 70%, a much higher number than you'd expect. There was a related question right after that. I consider the other person's feelings before my own opinion. More than half of respondents said yes to that one too. Looking at both results together made it even clearer that caring too much about what others think isn't just a problem for a handful of people. And this isn't unique to any one culture. The pattern of neglecting yourself because you're too focused on how others see you comes up again and again in therapy and counseling settings across many different countries. The way it shows up and how intense it is might differ slightly by culture, but the underlying pattern, erasing yourself to meet other people's expectations, doesn't stop at any border. So this isn't some special problem unique to us. It's closer to a trap that almost anyone, anywhere, can fall into. I kept wondering why this psychology develops in the first place. And in the end, it always comes back to being overly conscious of other people's opinions, other people's gaze. When picking out clothes you like, when deciding on a career path, even when choosing what to eat for lunch, you end up unconsciously reaching for other people's standards first. And it's not just me. Countless people are wearing themselves down in exactly the same way. So why do we end up this hyper-aware of others in the first place? When I really think it through, it's often a habit learned from a very young age. As kids, being approved of by our parents or teachers felt like safety itself. If you behaved well and met expectations, you were loved. If not, you got scolded or you disappointed someone. So naturally, we kept repeating that same pattern as we grew up, except now it's not our parents' reactions we're monitoring, it's our bosses, our friends, our partners. A survival strategy we needed as children stays with us as an adult habit. It's not a flaw, it's just an old habit. And a habit, once you notice it, can absolutely be relearned. There's something I don't want you to misunderstand here. We're social creatures. We have to get along with others, function in society. I fully understand that we can't live purely for ourselves alone. In fact, there are moments where being considerate toward others, knowing when to let something go, is genuinely a valuable skill. That's not a bad thing. If anything, it's a sign of maturity. The real issue is the ratio. Living that way all the time, constantly reading the room, and putting yourself last in every single moment, that's the actual problem. Choosing to set yourself aside once in a while is completely different from erasing yourself every single time. The former is mature consideration. The latter is a slow, steady process of using yourself up. Keep living like that, and eventually your mind wears down completely, your energy drains away, you laugh less, nothing feels enjoyable anymore. Things that used to excite you start feeling flat, and you start getting irritated by things that shouldn't bother you at all. Sleep stops feeling restful, and waking up gets heavier and heavier. In severe cases, like what happened to me, you can lose touch with your own mind entirely, to the point where you're not even sure what you like or what you actually want anymore. I like to compare it to a rubber band. A rubber band can keep its elasticity if you stretch it and then let it go back to its natural shape from time to time, but leave it stretched out indefinitely, and it eventually loses its elasticity for good. It never bounces back. The mind works the same way. It's fine to stretch yourself a little for someone else once in a while. The problem is leaving yourself stretched out permanently. Some of you watching this right now might already be at the point where your mind and body are seriously worn down, where your heart pounds out of nowhere, where you suddenly feel like you can't breathe. That's not weakness. That's your body signaling that you've been pushing yourself too hard for too long. I've laid out what to do in that situation in a pinned comment, so please take a moment to check it out. If you're not quite at that point yet, but you've noticed yourself constantly reading the room lately and feeling worn down, there's a book I'd like to recommend. It's called Your Erroneous Zones by psychologist Wayne Dyer. It's sold over 100 million copies worldwide, and it's a genuinely fascinating read. When people hear the word selfish, they usually think of something negative, someone who pushes others aside to serve their own interests. But that's not what the book means by it at all. What it's actually describing is caring for yourself, respecting yourself, refusing to mistreat yourself. That instinct only becomes a problem when it's taken to an extreme. The instinct itself isn't the issue. We grew up being told over and over that being selfish is bad. We were taught to always put others first, to always compromise. Because of that, we ended up completely misunderstanding the concept, turning basic self-care into something to feel guilty about. The kind of happy selfishness this book describes is completely different from someone who sacrifices others for their own gain. It's someone who, precisely because they know how to care for themselves, is capable of genuinely caring for others too. You have to know how to love yourself before you can truly know how to love someone else. That's not a reversed order, that's actually the correct order all along. What struck me most while reading it was this: don't tie your own worth to other people's approval or praise. Without realizing it, I used to have good days when someone complimented me, and feel unnecessarily small when no one said anything. But because that standard lived outside of me, in other people, my mood would swing up and down multiple times a day. After reading this book, I started practicing bringing that standard back inside myself, little by little. The book goes into real detail about what it actually looks like to live for yourself, and what concrete steps you can take to get there. Of course, reading one book doesn't change everything overnight. I still catch myself reading the room sometimes, even now. But there's a real difference. I used to think that was just normal, and now I recognize it as a habit, one I can consciously choose to respond to differently. Rebuilding these concepts one at a time is exactly where the real change begins. I'm not telling you this to promote the book. There was a time when I lost myself so completely from constantly watching others that I felt like I was falling apart, and reading this book genuinely helped me during that time. I had to stop and pause several times while reading it because parts of it felt like they were describing my own life, and it hurt. That's why I wanted to genuinely share it with you today. To anyone who sees themselves in this story, please don't scold yourself for being weak. Instead, acknowledge how hard you've been working all this time. People who have pushed themselves this hard are often the ones who are hardest on themselves. You can start shifting that direction from right now. You don't have to change completely all at once. Today, just start by asking yourself what you want, instead of defaulting to what others expect. Start with something as small as choosing what to have for lunch or deciding your weekend plans. It doesn't have to be some grand resolution. Tonight, just pick one thing you actually want without worrying about anyone else's reaction. It could be as simple as what you eat for dinner or how you choose to end your day. Small choices like that stacked up over time, and at some point you'll notice that the way you treat yourself has genuinely started to shift. I hope this video becomes a small starting point for someone out there. Living for others matters, of course, but before that, start by taking care of yourself first. You deserve that much.